Okay, let's do this. What are we going to talk about today? So, between yesterday afternoon and evening, and then this morning, and maybe early afternoon, so between yesterday and today, I wrote a piece that I put out on my Substack a couple of hours ago um, about my buddy Rob Green. Okay, so Rob Green, I consider him a friend. He's a good guy. We've actually only met in person a couple of times, but we corresponded quite a bit. And of course, he is a true hero, a champion of liberty in a very real way. I don't exaggerate at all when I say that. And so he's a person that I admire, that I look up to, and also I would say other people that I look up to also look up to him. So I wrote a piece today on my Substack that I put out that I called "In Defense of Rob Green." Well, why defense of Rob Green? So Rob, because of his continued voice in standing up against tyranny within the military, has recently had an investigation opened up by his leadership in the Navy because of some comments that he has made recently that certain individuals in the Navy, of course, don't like. So we're going to talk about that today, just based on what I know about military accountability efforts, what I know about Rob, and then also things that he has just put out publicly or things that he has written that we can kind of piece together exactly what is going on, just so we can make others aware of exactly what is happening. Because remember, what happens in the military affects what happens in society at large. We must understand that. So even if you have nothing to do with the military, this still impacts you, and you should be aware of this. If you are in the military, were in the military, or have family members or friends that are in the military, then you absolutely should be paying attention. So with that, let's go ahead and we're going to look at the Substack here that I wrote today. We're going to kind of go through it. I'll read through this. I'll stop at some points and maybe offer some additional commentary along the way. So, like I said, this was published earlier today, just a couple hours ago. So, July 13th, 2025. Okay. It's called "In Defense of Rob Green." Let's go ahead. Let's get into the piece. You may not know Rob Green, but even if you don't, he's currently fighting for you in ways you may not even recognize. There's a struggle still going on right now within the military that impacts all Americans, even those who have never served in uniform. That's because policies implemented within the military often serve as a harbinger of what's to come in society at large. Right or wrong, good or bad, the military is one of the most important pillars of our society. This importance extends beyond the obvious martial prowess. The armed forces also maintain a significant cultural gravitas. If healthy, the culture in the military contributes to overall societal health and prosperity. However, if corrupt and putrid, as our military currently is, it likewise contributes in no small way to the broader festering rot across the country. The clearest recent example of this is the military COVID shot mandate, implemented by then Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on August 24th, 2021. This is where Rob Green comes in. Rob Green. Navy Commander Rob Green doesn't need me to defend him. He's already on the side of truth, righteousness, and the law. Rob is a U.S. Naval Academy graduate that actually internalized what he learned there, unlike many other graduates who have since rejected the values imparted to them at Annapolis. Okay, just pause real quick. If you don't know about the Naval Academy, it's at Annapolis. That's where it's located. Rob is also a man of faith with strong moral convictions. He's a married father of 7. He holds a deep desire to do what's right, even if that means openly challenging tyranny. I don't mean that in the artificially moralized way in which each side of a political divide may try to paint their efforts as a crusade against the actions of the other side. I mean, quite literally, that Rob Green is in a fight against tyranny as he stands against those within the Department of Defense and broader federal government apparatus that have broken the law and continue to cover for their crimes to this day. Over the past few years, these crimes have resulted in the deaths, physical injuries, and other harms suffered by untold numbers of Americans. Rob has refused to allow DOD to get away with the crimes that have impacted not only the lives of service members, but also the overall readiness of our military formations. Rob is a true leader amid a profession that used to build these types of officers, but has since clearly abandoned that endeavor. Rob appears to be among the last of a dying breed, a military man of honor that takes his oaths and obligations seriously. I'm proud to know Rob and to consider him a friend. I admire him for having the courage that very few do, even in a setting that ostensibly selects for that exact trait. Last week, on July 9th, 2025, Rob announced on his X account that his Navy leadership had opened an investigation into comments he had made about the actions of senior military leaders. Okay, so pause for a second. So I'm going to go through and I have that tweet or that post from X. It's fairly long, and I have it kind of broken up, and I posted in a couple of spots here as I'm kind of going through and in the way that I wrote the Substack. So when you read this, or if you're interested, go find the Substack, open it up, and then read through the post in its entirety. If you want to do that. But anyway, so I'm going to read the first part of that post, which I included here in the Substack. So this is from Rob Green's post on his X account, posted July 9th. So he says, life update. I was informed yesterday that my chain of command placed me under investigation for publicly calling out the unconstitutional and illegal actions by military leadership during the COVID-19 mandates. All right, back to me. Central to the investigation was Rob's usage of language that characterized senior officers of being, quote, domestic enemies of the Constitution, unquote. Then I put in another screenshot from that same post on July 9th, so just a couple of days ago. So this is Rob. My leadership does not like that I have used the words domestic enemies of the Constitution to describe many of them for their actions during the mandates. Okay, back to me. Those unfamiliar with Rob, the situation, or the laws broken by DOD may assume at first glance that such charged language might warrant an investigation. They might suggest that a uniformed service member can't make that type of claim about his superior. Others might remind us that an investigation in and of itself doesn't necessarily imply guilt, and that we should await the findings and conclusions. However, this situation is several years in the making, and Rob's position has been consistent, bold, but consistent. And then I put another screenshot here in from the same post. I'm going to read it. So this is from Rob's post. So Rob says, for 4 years, I have been using the same language and the same demand for accountability that I continue to use on this platform. I started with internal filings to my leadership that were systematically ignored. I then turned to Congress and filed whistleblower complaints that were ignored by all but a few courageous members of Congress. Having been ignored by both the executive and legislative branches of government, I turned to the judicial branch and wrote the key declaration in the Navy SEALs lawsuit that provided the critical evidence required to help them win a class-wide injunction. This injunction halted the unlawful discharges for all Navy sailors with a religious accommodation. As Rob, now back to me, as Rob mentions in an X post made on June 13th, 2025, he is a whistleblower. So now, I was reading to you from a post that he made on July 9th, just a couple days ago. So now I'm going to read to you from a post that he made on June 13th, so a month ago, which I have the screenshot of the post included in the Substack. So this is Rob. How much time must pass for it to be okay to perpetrate whistleblower reprisal? What happens if the violations brought to the attention of leadership/Congress are never addressed? Should the whistleblower just shut up and go away? What if he refuses to stop? I am a whistleblower, and I have not gone away. I will not be silent. Some of the admirals and generals who violated the law and the constitutional rights of service members remain in power. They have not been held accountable. They do not like that I will not let it go. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. All right, back to me. He, meaning Rob, attached to the same June 13th post a screenshot of a memo dated 7 January 2022 that he had sent to members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. And then I put a screenshot here and there I put a screenshot in the Substack of this one-page memo that Rob included in his X post from last month, but the memo is dated 7 January 2022. So the memo is 3.5 years old. I'm not going to read through the entire memo. You can find it in the Substack, or you can go to Rob's post and find it. But I am going to comment on it. So reading now from the Substack. In the memo seen above, Rob makes it clear that he was reaching out to members of Congress because of continued discriminatory action within the Navy dealing with a religious accommodation request for the COVID shots. Just checking something real quick here. Yeah. Okay, Rob makes it clear that he was reaching out to members of Congress because of continued discriminatory action within the Navy dealing with religious accommodation requests for the COVID shots. So if you're not aware of what that is, so accommodation requests are requests that you would submit in order to gain a potential exemption, so that you would not have to take the shot. So there could be religious requests, for an exemption. And then there also could be, medical requests or some other request in which you seek an exemption so you don't have to take the COVID shot. These things exist for other types of shots too. This complaint became instrumental in securing a preliminary injunction in a federal court case involving other Navy personnel. However, the Navy maintained its original policy of denying religious accommodation requests, prompting Rob to state in the memo that, quote, the Navy has proven incapable of policing itself, unquote. So real quick, pause here. Rob talks a lot about the Navy because he's in the Navy. I talk a lot about the Army because I was in the Army. But when we're talking about the COVID shot mandate and a lot of these policies, there was not necessarily a lot of difference between the way in which the different services were implementing their policies, et cetera. Sometimes there were there may be a little bit of difference, but not major difference between what the Navy was doing or the Army or whichever service. The memo above was submitted to members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees 3.5 years ago. Okay, remember, January of 2022. So why the investigation now? What has changed? Rob is accurate in his claim that senior military leaders have acted in open defiance of their oaths to support and defend the Constitution. This may be a painful truth, but it's the truth nonetheless. Rob is by no means the only one to have made these statements. I have made very similar claims. Then I put a bunch of links as to where I've said very similar things. Of course, I'm out of the military and Rob still serves. Are we to remain silent as military leaders violate their oaths of office and put American lives and liberties at risk? In the July 9th post, Rob even notes that the current Secretary of Defense has acknowledged that the COVID shot mandate was unlawful. And I put in two links. One is to the video that he put out on his X account, Pete Hegseth, where he said, I didn't like the way that he put it out, but whatever, just very, very smug. But in any case, he did say, hey, we all know that, the previous administration's mandate was unlawful. He does say that. I put the link in there to the video on his X account where he says that. I also put another link to the memo where that is further codified in writing. So here's Rob, part of what he says in his July 9 post. Rob says, despite definitive legal proof that military leaders broke the law and violated constitutional rights, and a subsequent public acknowledgement of this by the Secretary of Defense, there has been no accountability. Back to me. As Rob makes clear in the same post, he has been consistent in calling out these unlawful actions. Back to Rob. My public appeals through this platform and my other public works are meant as an appeal to the highest human authority in the land, we the people, because all other authorities are either the perpetrators themselves or they are not enforcing the accountability and restoration POTUS demanded. I wrote a book about the entire affair to make sure that this unlawful activity and the harms it caused were not forgotten to history. My leadership does not like that I have used the words domestic enemies of the Constitution to describe many of them for their actions during the mandates. But where were they when thousands of us notified them about the laws they were breaking? Back to me. So again, I ask, why the investigation now? What conditions in the environment have changed between now and a few years ago? If anything, Rob has been vindicated. And what will the result of the investigation be? Could this end Rob's career? What does this portend for others in the military or in other sectors of the government or society? The Navy's recent actions against Rob can only be considered reprisals against an honest officer with the courage to tell the truth and uphold his oath to support and defend the Constitution. All right, so we'll give another overview here. Rob's name has become synonymous with military accountability, and that's for good reason. He has become the most outspoken voice on DOD's unlawful COVID-19 policies, including the COVID shot mandate. He has consistently called out senior military leaders for their unlawful and harmful actions. He informed his chain of command that their actions were depriving service members of their constitutionally protected rights. He even wrote a book called Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, which was appropriately published on July 4th, 2023. He courageously published the book in his own name, knowing full well that unscrupulous senior officers might take great umbrage at his characterization of their actions. Rob's book describes DOD's policies and outlines the significant legal problems associated with them. He also shares the personal stories of various troops across the military that were directly impacted by DOD's actions. In a review that I did just before its release, I had this to say about Rob's book. Okay, so just before the book came out, I had already gotten a copy that Rob had sent me of the text of the book. I had read it, and so I wrote a review just before it was going to come out. So now I'm quoting from the review that I wrote, and this is not the entire review, but I did include a couple of paragraphs from that review in this Substack. So now this is me quoting myself from this review that I wrote about Rob's book. The most gripping part of the book is the series of accounts depicting the obstacles faced by those who resisted the mandate, meaning the COVID shot mandate. though their actions are unlikely to be romanticized via the same immortal imagery as Washington's crossing of the Delaware or the Marines on Iwo Jima, the moral courage demonstrated by these men and women is just as real and just as uncommon as the physical bravery of those men of yore. Rob rightly describes this as a spiritual fight. He frames the book first and foremost by his faith in God. He truly gives us an insider's view into the battle for the soul of the military. Secondly, he offers a critical historical perspective by explaining the link between the founding fathers and the freedoms we have today. Within this historical context, he describes the intent behind the oath to the Constitution and the moral courage required to fulfill that oath in the modern military. He expresses how this fight against the mandate is about so much more than resistance to a single injection. It is about defending individual liberty as our founding fathers intended. The narrative is replete with examples of moral failings, legal obfuscations, and careerist maneuverings by government and DoD officials. Rob describes the collusion between DoD, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Justice to obscure the legal problems of attempting to mandate a product that remained under Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. He also explains the process used by senior Navy leaders to illegally implement a system of default disapprovals for service members requesting religious accommodations for their sincere, faith-based objections to the vaccines. He even provides a clear example of a stark miscarriage of justice resulting from a judge's mischaracterization of the law covering the administration of EUA products, unquote. Okay, so that's the end of me quoting myself in the review that I wrote, 2 years ago about Rob's book. And then I include a link in here I include the link to that review that I wrote, but I also include another link to a video that I did in which I reviewed Rob's book in much more detail alongside Matt Lohmeyer's also really great book. Okay, back to the Substack. Rob's book instantly became an artifact in that it so aptly depicted the plight of the service member in attempting to negotiate the struggles corresponding to DoD's unlawful actions. The story told was so much more than the sum of the pages and the words on each page. Many service members personally identified with the book, realizing that it accurately described what was happening as the military turned against its own troops, subjecting them to the deprivation of rights, unlawful coercion, discrimination, isolation, career-damaging measures, etc. In fact, copies of Rob's books were mailed to the offices of senior leaders all across the military, and then I include a link where you can learn more about that book operation. How did DoD leaders respond to Rob's book? Silence. They refused to react, at least publicly, in any way. They must have known that their best course of action was to ignore the book. Even publicly renouncing it would perhaps lend some credibility to its assertions. Rob's book title is telling. The title makes clear that there are service members bravely defending the Constitution within the ranks. But against whom? How is it behind enemy lines? Who is this enemy? Rob himself makes this point in his July 9th X post. This is Rob now. Where were they when I published my book about their actions 2 years ago? Everything I am saying now, I have been saying for years. The book is literally titled Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. I was not stationed on some foreign frontier during the mandates. No, I was stationed right here in the United States. What enemy lines do they think I was talking about? Rob's characterization of senior military leaders as domestic enemies of the Constitution isn't new. and it certainly isn't untrue. The Declaration of Military Accountability. Rob's efforts to push for significant military reform as it pertains to internally operating within constitutional parameters didn't end with publishing a book. Within a few months of its release, he once again set out to put thoughts on paper. In doing so, he penned what would become the Declaration of Military Accountability. This consisted of an open letter addressed to the American people, not military leadership. This distinction is important. After nearly 2.5 years of appealing to senior officers to no avail, the idea was that the letter would be a higher appeal to we, the people. The letter was deliberately written in the spirit of American founding documents, principally the Declaration of Independence. Rob's structure and diction were particularly designed to replicate the voice of the Declaration of Independence and the sentiment of freedom that animated that document. In fact, Rob included an epigraph citing John Adams. Rob wrote an initial draft that he then socialized with a small group of like-minded individuals, including myself, for feedback or recommended edits. Minor revisions were made, and the document was slightly condensed in length. The letter was then further passed around until a total of 231 brave souls signed their names to it. In essence, this was a declaration to the American people that the 231 signatories would do everything lawfully possible to ensure that the senior military leaders didn't destroy the institution. And then I put in a screenshot of the entire Declaration of Military Accountability, which is just one page. And I also put in the link to where you can go find it. Perhaps most boldly, the letter included the names of some of the most senior officers in the entire military, along with the egregious actions they had carried out. On January 1st, 2024, the Declaration of Military Accountability was sent via email to the highest ranking officers in the U.S. military. I sent that email. The idea was that even though the letter was addressed to the American people, we wanted senior Pentagon leaders to know how we thought and what we planned to do. We also wanted them to know we were announcing it to the American public. Within minutes of sending that email to senior military leaders, I then posted on X about the email and included in the post a screenshot of the declaration. This was the moment in which the Declaration of Military Accountability was first seen publicly. So if you've heard me talk about this all last year, I don't even know how many interviews, at least 100, about the Declaration of Military Accountability, the DMA. Okay, so when Rob wrote this, he was like, hey, we got to release this on January 1st, on New Year's Day. We hit the new year, 2024. We hit the ground running. And so, we decided that I, already being out of the military, I was going to be the one to kind of, release this, which is fine. So early in the morning on January 1st at 4 a.m. DC time, many of you have already heard the story, but I sent an email to senior leaders in the military to include the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, et cetera, which is the highest ranking, uniformed service member. So I sent it to, a group of these super high ranking senior military leaders, many of whom are named for their egregious actions in the document itself. I sent them an email. I included a copy of the document, and I told them that, hey, this is about to hit the streets. We're about to release this to the public, giving you a heads up, because at the end of the day, this letter is us informing the American public that we are not going to let you destroy the military. I sent that email at exactly 4 a.m. DC time on January 1st, 2024. A couple of minutes later, I put out a post on Twitter. I think I put it out at like 4:07 a.m. So 7 minutes later on New Year's Day, 2024. So I put in a screenshot here of my post, but in that post, I also screenshot a copy of the, the one-page Declaration of Military Accountability, and then we put it on a website, etc. But anyway, so here's the post that I put out. At 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, a few minutes ago, senior military leaders received an email with a letter attached called the Declaration of Military Accountability. I know because I sent the email. I sent it on behalf of myself and 230 other signatories of the letter. The letter is not addressed to the military leaders, but rather to the American people. The email was merely to inform these military leaders that there is a group of troops and vets pledging to the American public that we will do everything lawfully within our power to stop the willful destruction of our military by its own leadership. Let's take our country back in 2024, and let's begin by defending our military from its own leadership. You can find the body of the letter below. Soon we'll have it on a website where you can find it as well, along with the names of the 231 signatories. Okay, so that was my post I put out. I included a screenshot of the DMA, the Declaration of Military Accountability. Okay, we then posted, this is me back at the Substack reading again. We then posted the Declaration of Military Accountability to a website we created. On the website, any viewer could find the full text of the letter, as well as the names of the 231 signatories. Additionally, we later included a petition that anyone who agreed with our push for accountability could sign. That petition gained tens of thousands of signatures. This was not subversion from the shadow. It wasn't from the shadows at all. We openly proclaimed what we were doing. And it wasn't subversive. It was counter-subversive. We weren't the ones subverting the Constitution, the law, or military readiness. We weren't the ones depriving individuals of their rights. We weren't the ones pushing harmful shots. We weren't the ones destroying careers. We weren't the ones destroying trust. We weren't the ones that eradicated military readiness. We weren't the ones openly destroying everything this country stands for. We stood and still stand in direct opposition to those who have actively subverted the most important pillars of our nation and to this day continue to cover for their crimes. We aimed to abide by the oaths we had made to support and defend the Constitution and directly challenged those who use their rank and position to tear down what many of us revere with a certain civic sanctity. What was the response from senior military leaders to this Declaration of Military Accountability that mentioned many of them by name and was emailed directly to their inboxes on New Year's Day? The same as the response to Rob's book, strategic silence. Again, the idea must have been that to even offer a refutation of the Declaration would have been an acknowledgement of its existence and therefore possible merit. Military accountability now. Throughout 2024, the sentiment of military accountability remained strong. A core group emerged of those centrally engaged in the push for military accountability. Hundreds of interviews were given, some of which were on very prominent platforms. Spaces events were held on X. Op-eds and books were written. Conversations were held with members of Congress. Some individuals within the military accountability effort even ran for political office themselves. All these actions were the result of courageous individuals deciding to stand on principle. They saw a massive problem and decided they were going to confront it. And they drew inspiration from Rob Greene, who had consistently led from the front, even at the risk of great cost to himself. Rob and I haven't always fully agreed on our respective strategic assessments of the situation as it pertains to DoD and military accountability. While we largely agreed on the goals we wanted to achieve, we didn't always see eye to eye on the pathway to achieve those goals. A bit of this naturally resulted from our somewhat differing understandings of the strategic environment. These differing assessments are most evident in the fact that one of us, me, resigned from the military choosing to fight from outside the military, while the other, Rob, opted to fight from within. Our respective strategic approaches have oftentimes been very tightly aligned, and at other times have been less so. That doesn't mean we had wildly opposing assessments. Our assessments have always been far more aligned than divergent. But having a difference of opinion on a strategic approach in no way implies a question as to Rob's courage or sincerity. Rob has proven time and again that he embodies the values we as Americans should want in our military officers. He has proven it when it most matters. When senior Pentagon officials sided against the Constitution and the country, Rob remained strong. Rather than shrink from adversity, he faced the challenges head on. He placed his faith in God and moved forward. Those are the kinds of people I most admire. Those like Rob Green who do what's right because it's right, regardless of the personal consequences. And that's why senior military officers have deemed him a threat. All right, conclusion. We're almost done here. But this is the most important part. When you come for Rob Green, you come for all of us. You come for all those who have dared to challenge the tarnished, corrupted authority of the U.S. military and broader U.S. government. You come for all those who have already demonstrated in the furnace of affliction the courage to stare unflinchingly into the face of tyranny and proclaim, "I will not comply." You come for all those who have already expressed through deed the willingness to align with truth, no matter the personal cost. The reprisals against Rob not only represent a massive moral failing on the part of the military, they also represent a massive strategic error. How? In perhaps the most iconic scene of the 1960 movie Spartacus, Roman general and senator Marcus Licinius Crassus receives an unwelcome shock when he offers to spare the defeated slave army from crucifixion on the condition that they identify their leader, Spartacus. Upon hearing the demand, Spartacus resolutely stands to identify himself and give himself up, ensuring the lives of the remaining slaves will be spared, though he will surely be crucified. As he stands, however, his friend Antoninus also stands and loudly shouts, "I'm Spartacus." Immediately, other slaves also stand, and from across the entire field, shouts of "I'm Spartacus" can be heard, making it impossible to identify the true Spartacus. Crassus, the powerful general and senator, realizes that despite his victory on the battlefield, he is at that moment unable to personally vanquish his nemesis. Though Rob's identity is, of course, known to the Navy, after all, he's always challenged them openly in his own name, the application of this lesson still stands. In the fight against military tyranny, we're all Rob Green now. Anyway, so I'll put the link to that Substack in the description. The fight for tyranny continues. We have not won. There are those who would tell you that we have won or we are winning. I disagree with both of those assessments. I think things are still very much trending in the wrong direction. And now is the time for serious people to get serious about serious things. Thank you.